Doug, thank you so much for being here in this podcast. And
it's my pleasure.
So just to have a quick overview on your bodybuilding career, I know you grew up in bodybuilding during the 70s and with a big achievement in 1986 for the Mr. Universe. So could you please just be a little bit back on this childhood story about bodybuilding? What was the big link for you, to go in this physical culture and development about your physique?
Okay, well, I started exercising at home at the age of 14.
Yeah.
And then when I was 15 years old, there was a gym locally. I was very lucky. Bill Pearl, four-time Mr. Universe winner, had a gym 5 blocks from my home. So yeah. Of course I didn't know who he was yet. I would discover later who he was, but I was very lucky to have that proximity. So I went there and I asked him, because I couldn't afford to join the gym, I asked him if he would allow me to work doing janitorial work for him in exchange for my membership. So he said yes. So I would go in there every Saturday and I would help scrub the showers and sweep the parking lot and polish the chrome machines and all that. And then within about a year, I was competing in my first teenage contest at the age of 16. And then I was hooked. I fell in love with bodybuilding. I was very thin. I took second place in that very first contest, but I was very motivated to do more. So I competed a couple more times as a teenager. I won Teenage Mr. California and Teenage Mr. America. And then I won Mr. California in 1982. And then in 1986, I won my division in Mr. America and in Mr. Universe. And then I took big breaks. I didn't compete again until the year 2000. Then I didn't compete again until 2010. Then 2012, 14, 16, and 19. Yeah. But in that time, I won a lot of different contests. It was fun.
Yeah, that's a really cool story because as I was listening in another podcast with Paul James, I will share it in the podcast also. You said that after this winning of Mr. Universe, it was like kind of a big achievement in your life, and maybe you feel at the moment, okay, I did it, I do it all. What did I move next? And I know you already opened your gym at the moment, or a few years before the Mr. Universe.
Right. Well, what happened is, when I was, I competed in the 1983 Mr. America competition right after winning the Mr. California in 1982. And I really wanted to open up my gym. And at the time, I thought, for some strange reason, I thought that I needed to win Mr. America in order to open my gym. And then that was the year Jeff King won Mr. America. And of course, he was fantastic. There was no way anybody was going to beat him that year. And I placed 5th in that division. But I opened up my gym in 1983. And then about 2 years or so after I opened up the gym, then I prepared again and competed for Mr. America and Mr. Universe and won my division.
Crazy story. So after that, you move and you be back in competition in 2000.
Yeah.
And the bodybuilding was really evolving at this moment. Physique were trying really big change with Ronnie Coleman and guys like that, with really more muscle mass. And what would be your point on that? On this evolution. I mean, do you when you go back to bodybuilding, it was something really else? Do you feel it or not so much in the deep passion about that?
Well, I've always thought this was sort of a funny subject. The whole idea of what type of physique people want or people train for. I mean, so much of the physique that we end up having is determined by genetics. It's not determined by the way we train. I mean, I don't think Frank Zane could have had any kind of body other than the kind of body he had.
Yeah.
Because of his genetics. So I didn't have the choice to be Lee Haney or Dorian Yates. I just know there's just no way I could have done that. But in terms of my ability to train, you know, I from the time I was very young, I was very inquisitive about the best exercises because I could tell they were very different. For example, if you do a parallel bar dips, it doesn't feel the same way that a flat dumbbell press does. If you do standing side raise, it doesn't feel the way an upright row feels. And yet these are supposed to be for the same muscle group. So I think the reason why I was able to continue training and continue competing all the way until I was 59 years old is because I learned that you can train using exercises that load a muscle more, but with less weight. And you don't jeopardize the schedule. Yes, exactly. You know, the skeleton, the spine and all that.
Yeah. And, you know, when this bodybuilding was evolving and maybe, you know, Tom Platz is used to say right now that there is a lot of science right now, but there is less art than before. What's your point on that?
There's a lot less what?
Art, like artistic approach.
Oh, artistic, yes. Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, from a sociological standpoint, you know, certain time periods and certain cultures have certain behaviors that are emulated. You know, people tend to follow the example of certain people. And, you know, in the 80s and the 70s and 80s, you know, we were lucky to have Ed Corney and Frank Zane and Bob Paris and Francis Benfato and people who were in, you know, McAwee, who were magnificent posers. And it was so inspiring to watch them move with elegance and grace. And then I think what happened is during those early days of bodybuilding in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, you know, you could tell whose body you were looking at just by looking at their silhouette.
Yeah.
Now, not so much. You know, you didn't even need to actually see them. You could tell who it was just by their silhouette. All the bodies were so different back then. Today, they're very similar. And I think what happened is that back in those days, you know, yes, there were steroids, but the sport didn't rely on them so much. And so as a result of that, you know, it relied more on individualism and hard work and you know, your artistic interpretation of the body. And I think what happened is more and more, and frankly, I don't even know what happened because it's a disaster now. It really is a disaster now. The bodies do not look pretty now. The waists are all large. The abdomens are distended. There's too many veins, but not enough muscular striation. It's very different now. And I think what happened is the whole artistry of the body left, and then with it just left the presentation as well. And I think also it got to the point where bodybuilding was so popular, there were so many contestants that they didn't really have time to use the posing as part of the deciding factor of who would win and who wouldn't win. It just became, you know, sort of an incidental throwaway thing. It's like, how does that guy look next to that guy when they stand next to each other? Okay, here's the decision. Never mind how they pose.
Yeah. Yeah, because as you know, we were talking about Olivier Rippert. He had a show in France right now, and we were talking about this subject. And he told to me, okay, you know, when you have 100 and 100 of participants, it's really hard to let them really 2 minutes, even 2 minutes of posing. And even right now in Mr. Universe, you will have less than 1 minute to do your presentation because it's really a mess to organize. Besides that, so yeah, it's forced the loss of artistic approach in posing right now.
Yeah, it's you know, now they just give you 60 seconds and there's really no time to walk on, to walk off. You know, it's very difficult to even find music that works for only 60 seconds.
Yeah, and you were talking about Bob Paris, and when you see a posing of Bob Paris, you know, like 4 minutes, and it takes time to come and to create something like a connection with the public. It's kind of crazy finishing on the ground, and wow, that's made me crazy to see that. You know, I love this version of bodybuilding, and I'm quite sad to see that disappear a lot right now.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but you sound young. And it's sad for me to think that the younger generation will have been deprived
Yeah.
of that artistry. I mean, I'm 60 years old now, so I can say I'm happy that I had my career when that was still the fashion. That was still, the way to do it. And there weren't so many bodybuilders around that, there wasn't time to do posing, and being a bodybuilder, had a little bit more distinction. Now it's, it's not as rare. It's not as uncommon. And it's not as respected.
Yeah, totally agree. And you are also talking about, symmetry and the silhouette of guys. And I think something really missing now is maybe, what I could call charisma. Back then when you talk about Frank Zane and other people, they all have their own style of training, of seeing things, of living the life of bodybuilder and things like that. And right now it's all about just eating muscle, sadly drugs also, but maybe too much. And no more else, they don't have any more kind of a personality I could find.
And there's the formality of it is also gone. It used to be that the judges all wore a tie, sometimes a sport jacket or a suit. Now you don't see it. The judges all wear T-shirts. Yeah. And the same thing with the bodybuilders also. When the bodybuilders before, when they were out and about, they wore button-down shirts. They wore jackets. They wore suits. You remember photos of Steve Reeves.
Yeah.
Beautiful suits. John Grimmick, Bill Pearl. It was a lovely time. And everything has sort of lost its elegance and formality now.
Yeah, an ability to speak and to have eloquence and things like that. Yeah, that's so true for guys like Chris.
It's almost like irreverence is the fashion now.
Yeah. But that's why because you were talking about I'm 26, so I'm quite young, and I'm in love with this era of bodybuilding, and I think today it missed a lot because young people have difficulty to identify themselves with nowadays bodybuilding. It's because it's a little bit too much for European approach. It's not like in the USA, and people so go on fitness and things like that, and they don't give any chance to bodybuilding because they think it's too much. And when you say, okay, look at physique like Doug Brignole, like Frank Zane, and you will see that you can create something really artistic and with, available proportion, I would say, not oversized, not oversized bodybuilding and muscle everywhere. And I'm trying to help bring back that with a lot of people back then who are really crazy approach and nice things to see. And, it's about health, not just about muscle, but aging cool and having a good health all the year long. And I love this idea. And it's sad to miss it right now.
The one of the things that, I guess to which you could attribute the change in I guess you could say in the sport is that, if you have someone like Frank Zane who looked magnificent, and he stands right next to someone like Dorian Yates, it's so overpowering. The mass is so overwhelming that it's hard. It's almost like you're trying to listen to classical music when there's hard rock playing louder.
Like this idea.
It's just too loud. It's just too overpowering that it blinds you. It covers up the fact that, there's something that's much more aesthetically appealing right next to it. And so that's, like if you're running a foot race, it's easy to say, well, who crossed the finish line first? Right. But when you're watching figure skating or gymnastics, now you have to talk about elegance and style and perfection, and it's just harder to measure perfection, and it allows for more corruption because the person who, let's say, there's always been corruption in bodybuilding because it's a subjective sport. You can always, the judge could always say, well, I happen to like that body better than this body, and you can't argue with me. That's my preference. And that's the problem, is that there's no definitive way of saying who is better than who when it comes to a painting or art.
Yeah, it's subjectivity also.
It's subjective. And so that's why, to some degree, I've always been a little bit against the idea of first place, second place, third place. I've always, it has helped me in my marketing and my credibility to say I'm Mr. America, Mr. Universe, of course. But, I would rather place third or fourth or fifth and have the more aesthetic body than to win the first place body if I won first place because I was only bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, because in your approach, it was not only about being bigger, for winning, but about working on your physical appearance and aesthetic and proportion and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I competed in the NABA World Championship in 2014 in Belfast, and there's a picture of the top 7 people. I'm in the top 7. I actually placed 7th. We're standing front relaxed, and without question, I'm the only one who had abs. I had the smallest waist. I had better development in my legs. But yet I was beaten by these people with these very strange looking bodies, large abdomens, small legs. And it was very obvious that the favorites were going to be the people that weighed more on the scale.
Yeah.
And to some degree, the people that were UK based. You know, the World Championship and in the universe, the NABA, tends to favor UK competitors. And so people would ask me, well, were you upset that you didn't place as high as you should have? And I said, no, my contest was with me. I brought the best package I could possibly bring. I couldn't have done a better preparation. I liked the way I looked on stage. I would have liked to have gotten the first place trophy, but that's the least of my concern. The biggest concern of mine is that I look as beautiful aesthetically as I can look.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a fight against yourself to check what kind of physique you could go beyond, you know.
Right.
All right. Yeah, that's nice mentality, because nowadays, you know, I have the feeling that people are it's all about winning, you know, and taking all the risk. And if they need to destroy the body to win, it's not a problem anymore. And I think, you know, it's not the good approach, I think.
Well, you know, social media has been a blessing and a bane. You know, it has helped people do things that they couldn't do before, like produce, you know, music albums and get marketing that they couldn't have bought before. So it's been wonderful in so many ways. But the negative aspect of social media is that it causes everyone to think that they can and should be a celebrity in their own right. And so they put 1,000 pounds on a leg press, way too much than can possibly be productive or safe. They do a videotape or a photo of it. They put it on Instagram or on YouTube or Facebook, whatever, and they get followers. And that seems to be the name of the game now. Everyone wants likes. Everyone wants followers. And so the quality is gone. You can get followers by being weird.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters now, is getting followers. If I can get followers by being weird or different or taking huge risks, then I'm going to do that instead of using common sense and making smart choices with my life.
Yeah. You were talking about the weight and things like that, and I know you have an approach which is quite similar in a way to Francis Benfato, to have a better connection and not using heavy weight when it's not needed, and most of the time it's not needed. And as we can see, people is trying to all the time maybe have a worse connection with muscle, but a bigger weight, you know.
Right. Well, the thing is that you know, the first thing that must be explained is that the body is a system of levers. All of our bones are levers. So if you do an exercise, let's say parallel bar dips, and you're doing it for triceps, the forearm lever, as soon as it moves away from the vertical neutral position, begins to load the tricep, but it only moves away from the neutral position by about 11%. So even though parallel bar dips are hard and feel as if they are working all the participating muscles as hard as possible, you're actually only getting 11% of your body weight as the tricep component. If you lay down on a flat bench and used a pair of, 20 pound, I guess that would be how many kilos? 12 kilos or something.
Yeah.
Of triceps, skull crushers, dumbbell tricep extensions, you could get twice as much load on your triceps with far less total effort made. So the first thing that has to be explained is that people subconsciously choose exercises that use mostly neutral or mostly shortened levers because they think that using a heavier weight automatically loads their muscles more. But that's physics. From a physics perspective, that's false. You can actually load a muscle more with less weight if the limbs you're using are straight, not bent, and if they're more horizontal than they are vertical. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, you know, the amount of strength that a muscle has, your triceps, for example, right now, is absolute. So the idea that your triceps can be stronger on one exercise and weaker on another, that's actually not true. Your tricep strength is your tricep strength. So when your tricep is working at maximum effort, let's say with strict form, if you then pile on more weight than what your tricep has already told you it's capable of, and now you're able to move more weight, but not without cheating, without momentum, your tricep isn't getting any more load than it was getting before, because maximum effort is maximum effort. Yeah. All you've done now is created a secondary movement by using momentum, and that secondary movement isn't helping you load your tricep anymore. So that's there's too much ego and not enough intelligence and science that's being applied in resistance exercise, and it's causing a lot of injuries.
Yeah. And yeah, about injuries, it's kind of a mess, because nowadays, you know, fitness industry grow a lot, and when you go in global chain, I would call that, you know, in France we have a lot, and in Europe too, you have a lot of people, and no coach or no bodybuilders, you know, even no power lifter. It's like a fitness approach, like just going on a compound movement and with a bad form and trying to put as much weight as possible. And there is just a few people who try to really understand the moves, understand the way it need to contract, and we don't have the chance right now to have people trying to, you know, giving good advice in gym, or it's kind of not so often.
Well, here's the problem, and this is a very, very unfortunate part of humanity, and that is that at the end of the day, commercialization will always dominate. So as long as someone is able to make money saying something that's not quite true, and as long as people are not aware that what they're being told is being told to them because the person who's telling it to you has commercial gain, then it's the blind leading the blind, right? And this is the difficult thing. So imagine that I'm Tiger Woods, right? And I'm being paid $3 million to say that this particular car manufacturer is the best. Well, I'm a golf player. I'm not an auto mechanic.
Yeah.
So consumers need to be aware of the fact that Tiger Woods may not actually think that car is the best, but he's willing to say it's the best because he's being paid to say it. Okay, so there's a lie, there's a falsehood, a fraud that's being created, and we have, in our society, we have grown to sort of like not pay attention and overlook it. But most of what we are told, in fact, most of what we are told about almost every subject, sometimes not entirely accurate or completely false, because there's often less profit in truth than there is in. So what happens is that you get these trainers who are being told one thing by the fitness industry, but the fitness industry is not being completely honest with them, because the fitness industry makes more money teaching trends than teaching science.
Yeah.
In fact, if the industry taught science, the science would reveal that the trends don't work. Yeah. So it is in their benefit to not teach the science and not teach the physics, because then there would be much less opportunity to sell different apparatus and different gadgets and different methods. And those things all make money for the industry. So the consumer comes along and he meets with the trainer. The trainer is quote unquote certified. And so he believes the trainer is an expert and knows what he's doing. And the trainer might actually think he's an expert and knows what he's doing, but he's being misled by the industry above him, because, you know, there's more profit for the industry. So a lot of people become the pawn without even realizing that they're actually just being used by a greater power, and that their knowledge isn't as great as you think it is.
Yeah. I have a question, Doug. You know, nowadays, people, if they want to compete and go over their limit, they are okay. I need to have a coach because I need to have someone to take me to do, my foods, to do my training, all of stuff. And
Yep.
I trust in mentor, I trust in training partners, but I don't really like this idea to give all to a coach. So about your bodybuilding history, I know like someone like Beeple would be a mentor for you, but what was your approach about it? Do you think having a coach is a good idea right now, as we can see it, or what's your point on that?
Well, it all depends on how good the coach is. If the coach is good, then yes, it's good to have the coach. If the coach is bad, then it's bad to have the coach. When I started working out in 1974, at the age of 14, there was no such industry as a trainer industry.
Yeah.
Exercise science was, in its infancy, and was not. If you looked for exercise science, what you would find would be presented in a very complicated manner. It was not consumer friendly. So, but I was always very, very inquisitive, and I was always sort of a free thinker. And I guess that's the best way to say free thinker, because I don't want to say that I was a skeptic, but I was always, I guess, maybe aware that what someone is saying may not be accurate, although I'm not necessarily accusing them of lying.
Yeah, will not be only true.
Yeah, so for example, and I was very alert, I was very awake. So I was 16 years old or 15 years old when I first went to Bill Pearl's gym, and I would always listen to what Bill was saying when he was talking to other people. And I would hear him telling, let's say, a bodybuilder that if he does tricep push downs for 10 repetitions, that his triceps would get bigger. But then I would hear him tell the woman who's asked Bill Pearl, what can I do to make my triceps smaller? Of course, she's not saying, how can I make the muscle smaller? She's asking, how can I make the back of my arms smaller? Right? Because women tend to accumulate more fat on the back of their arms than men do. So Bill would say, well, if you do this tricep push down for 20 repetitions, it'll make it smaller. So here I am at 15 years old, and I'm listening to this. I'm saying, so 10 repetitions makes it bigger and 20 repetitions makes it smaller. What does 15 repetitions do? Does that mean that's the crossover? It does nothing at 15. So clearly, someone like Bill Pearl was not giving that woman the best advice.
Yeah.
What he could have said to her, and I never heard him say it, was, well, the fat on the back of the arm is separate from the muscle that's on the back of the arm. It gains or loses by way of a different process. It cannot be addressed locally. It must be addressed systemically as a whole body unit. When your body loses fat, it loses fat as a whole, or it gains it as a whole. But you can't select where you're going to put fat on. You can't select where you're going to take fat off. But Bill Pearl never said that. Now, do I fault Bill Pearl for saying that? No, of course not, because Bill was a businessman. He had a business. He had a gym. And his job was to be as helpful as possible. And he was probably thinking that, if this woman does enough exercise in total, that she will be burning more calories. But I've always thought it's best to explain what's going on and why it's happening that particular way, so that consumers know that, it's very easy for a woman to just assume, even though she might not have been told specifically, she might be assuming that the more exercise she does for the back of the arms, the more fat she'll lose on the back of the arms.
Yeah.
So rather than allowing her to make that assumption, I would say, well, if you want the fat on the arms to go away, you can actually be more productive by just doing a lot of fast walking and reducing your calories.
Yeah.
Than you can by doing tricep exercises. And then she at least knows what other areas of her life to pay attention to, that don't think that you can eat whatever you want and be as lazy as you want. And as long as you did your tricep exercise, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, of course. Get the point. Yeah. So on your own history, did you were used to have someone to coach you or to mentor you for physical preparation, or do you do by your own?
Well, I guess I got off the question. So the point was that even though at first I assumed that Bill could help me, I quickly realized that Bill didn't have all the answers. In fact, I sort of made myself a little bit famous in that sense within Bill and the circle of friends there, because every once in a while I would ask Bill a question. And he would say, okay, well, if I give you the answer, are you going to follow my advice or are you going to ignore it? because he knew I oftentimes would not accept his advice. I would weigh it, I would listen to it, but then I would ask myself if that made sense, and then I would experiment, explore, ask other people, and little by little I started realizing that the industry itself is hugely confused, hugely misled, and you know, there's commercialization is one reason, of course, but I'll give you one example. You know, if I give you a rope and I tie the other end of that rope to a heavy box and I stand back away from you and I say, now pull on that rope, and you pull on that rope, that box will move straight in your direction and no other direction. That's just physics, right? Yeah. There's no way you can make that move, that box move in a direction other than toward you. Okay, so the moral of the story there is that all muscles pull their limbs toward their origins. So if I were to be the pectoral muscle origin that is highest on your sternum, if I could shrink myself down and stand on your sternum just below your collarbone, the very, very highest part of your chest, and held on to one of those pectoral fibers like a rope, and the other end of the rope is connected to the upper arm bone, and I pull, that arm bone is going to move in a direction that is equal to a flat bench. It's going to move in a perpendicular direction.
Yeah.
It is not going to move higher than my shoulder, as it would be the case for an incline press, because I don't have any pectoral origins on my chin. All of your pectoral origins are below your shoulder line. None are below or above your shoulder line. So there's no reason why we should believe that moving our arms in a direction that is higher than the shoulder line would work the upper pecs. There's nothing there. And yet every gym in the world has an incline bench.
Yeah.
It's just completely not logical. And if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, we evolved from quadrupeds. As we evolved into primates, we walked more progressively in upright directions, which means we moved arms in progressively more downward directions, but we never needed to move our arms in progressively upward directions. There were no incline benches in prehistoric times. There's nothing you can imagine a prehistoric hominid, Australopithecine, Homo sapien, early Homo sapien, having to move his arms in a 45-degree direction, angled upward or directly overhead. So even as a kid, I could feel that an overhead press didn't feel right. I could feel that an incline press didn't feel right. I could feel that an upright row didn't feel right. And so I didn't care if Bill Pearl told me to do this exercise, or if the book that I just bought told me. I could see that there was no truth in that. I could see that there's something wrong with this logic. It's not moving as properly as, let's say, you would feel when you're doing a standing side raise or a curl or a tricep push down or a leg extension. I mean, some movements you can tell if you're paying attention and don't just accept everything on blind faith. You can tell this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And I always heard the inner voice.
Since the beginning, you were really alert about all of that thing. Yeah, listening to your instinct and feelings about the muscle and pain.
Yeah, and paying attention. You know, how does this feel, and why does this not feel right? Yeah. And trying to find the commonality. In other words, if one exercise is mechanically good, let's identify the characteristics of that movement that make it good, that qualify it as good. And if we find one that's bad, what is it about this movement that qualifies it as bad? And then we can get a set of rules, and we can say, okay, all exercises that are good then must follow these set of guidelines. It moves the insertion of the muscle directly toward the origin. It provides full range of motion. It provides this, and this alignment, and then you can evaluate all the exercises for yourself. I mean, it is ridiculous to think that despite the fact that parallel bar dips and flat dumbbell press are drastically different movements, that they're equally good for the chest. There has to be some formula that qualifies a chest exercise as being good, and there is. And that is that the movement moves from the shoulder line either toward the top of the sternum or toward the bottom of the sternum, and that's it. That's where the fibers are. Flats and various versions of decline is the right anatomical movement, moving from the outside inward toward the midline of the body. That's what that muscle does best. Anything other than that is a departure from ideal movement.
Yeah. So yeah, since your young years, you were really into understanding the body and things like that. And how did you arrive, to the fact that you say, okay, I will work on my own method and trying to go really into sharing the science of it and how it happens, all of that?
Well, it's interesting because, it was a very, very gradual process. It didn't happen all at once. I mean, it took me, I would say, close to 30 years to get to the point where I could actually say that I was able to identify all the different features. There's about 12 of them that must be present for an exercise to be good. So they didn't happen all at once. And separate from that, human nature being what human nature is, and I'm not impervious to that. We do have a tendency to believe some things mistakenly, but out of tradition and out of habit and out of and having a difficult time separating our emotional attachment to an exercise and just because we logically know it's not correct. So what I would have, for example, the muscles of when someone says I'm working my upper inner back, if you were to look at an anatomy chart, what you would see is the biggest muscle of the upper inner back is the middle trapezius. But the middle trapezius starts on the spine and goes out to the outer edge of the shoulder blade and doesn't even cross the shoulder joint. It doesn't even connect to the arms. So when a person does rowing, 90%, maybe more, of their movement is arm movement. Very little of it is shoulder movement. So the rowing motion does actually much more for the rear deltoids than it does for the inner back, the middle trapezius. The rhomboids are there, and the teres major, teres minor are there, the infraspinatus are there, but none of them participate in rowing. So the reason I'm telling you this is because even though I first identified that the single best thing you can do for your middle trapezius is basically a backward shrug called scapular retraction. That's the thing that muscle does. It pulls the scapula backward. That's all it does. So I still couldn't let go of T-bar rowing because from an emotional standpoint, it's sort of hard to believe. It's hard to wrap your head around the fact that so many millions of people do rowing. And so you think, well, and so eventually I let go of rowing completely. And all I did for my last competition, which I won the Mr. Universe, was one arm cable pull-ins and scapular retraction. And that's it. And my back was as good as ever. Yeah. And definitely better than everybody else's. And so, but that's the difficulty that all of us have, is that when you hear something that's very logical, it doesn't necessarily change our mind right away. It takes a while. And it depends on how emotionally based you are. If you are more rational than emotional, you'll be able to make a switch more easily once you understand. But if you're more emotional than rational, you may never be able to let go of the old habits. Yeah.
And there is a fact, maybe using it as a tool. I mean by that, using all kind of method and understanding that maybe this exercise will provide you a better contraction and better involvement of your back. But always, sometimes I have the pleasure to do a T-bar row because you want to do it the way you could see Arnold do it on the picture, and using it like that, for pleasure, because most of the things, sometimes it could be hard to change your method because you have kind of a really deep pleasure to do it like that. It would be hard to cut it totally,
There's an experiment that was cited in the psychological literature. It was called the 100-monkey experiment. And the 100-monkey experiment, basically, it's not an official experiment, but it's a reference to the fact that people follow the masses. So if you see 5 monkeys doing something, as correct as that may be, you will still follow the other 95 monkeys.
Yeah, interesting.
It isn't until 60% of the monkeys are doing it a certain way that you will then start to believe that maybe that is the better way. But not until the majority of monkeys are doing it.
Yeah.
So you're basically not allowing yourself to think for yourself. You're not allowing yourself to process the information and make your own decision. You're letting other people make your decision for you. You're just saying, I will follow what everybody, I don't want to even think about it. But that's foolish, because some of this stuff is so easy to understand. If you just stop for just a second, you would actually be able to grasp it. But if you're emotionally driven, you will not be able to make that switch until the majority of people are doing it that way.
Yeah. I think it's a human thing, not only in sport, but in everything in life,
Yes.
We follow tendencies.
Politics, religion.
Yeah. And
I always tell people in terms of religion, I always say, like, my mother was obsessively Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to her, and my mother was wonderful, because she allowed me to free think. She wouldn't be defensive if I asked her questions that seemed to want to, change her thinking. But I would say, do you believe that Catholicism is the best religion? And she would say, yes. And I would say, do you know about the other religions? Well, no. Do you know everything there is to know about Catholicism? No. Do you think that only Catholics will get to heaven? Yes. So you think that someone who's a really, really good person but not Catholic will not get to heaven? Yes, that's what I believe. And I would say, well, you realize that you are Catholic in part because you were born in Chile, South America, and the majority of the population there is Catholic. If you were born in India, you probably would not be Catholic. If you were born, you the same person, but happened to be born in India, you'd be either Hindu or Sikh, or maybe Muslim as a possibility.
Yeah.
So whatever we believe is influenced by where we're born and what we're surrounded by.
Yeah.
And so that alone should make us all think that the things that we believe in, we might only believe in them because everyone around us was doing it. It might not even be accurate. We've just followed, the trend.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to criticize anybody's religion, but I am trying to show the fact that our beliefs are not necessarily entirely based on intelligence and logic. They're often based in part on who your mother and father are, what your neighbors are, who the people across the street are, what they think, what they do. Fashion trends are fashion trends for that reason. We follow the bell-bottom pant, and then when the bell-bottoms are, then all of a sudden we don't think bell-bottoms are attractive anymore. But once upon a time we thought they were attractive. Why did we think that? Well, because everybody else was doing it. Well, either they are attractive or they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. A common statement to say, okay, you are the addition of the 5 people you have the most in your life, and I think it's really a great point to see that, because you are always, the influence you have around you will determine the way you see the world. And if you don't have the way you have, your approach about, okay, always taking information, but not taking it as the only truth, and staying open-minded to other information, and keep, growing like that, I think it's the best way to see, not only in sport, but in life in general, I would say.
Yeah, and I also think that it's a reminder to us that we cannot let others determine our beliefs for us.
Yeah.
We have to give it some thought. We have to use our brain. We have to use our intelligence a little bit and question some things, and maybe do a little bit of research. I mean, if you were to just Google middle trapezius, you would see an anatomy chart and could very clearly see that the middle trapezius does not connect to the arms. So there's no way the middle trapezius can actually be doing the arm part of a rowing exercise. Yeah. Right? Same thing with the lower abs, right? We do leg raises for the lower abs, but all you have to do is look at an anatomy chart and see that the abs don't even connect to the legs. That something else is lifting the legs, but it's not the abs. So the next question you should ask yourself, if you're curious, if you're inquisitive, you should ask, well, okay, so if the legs are being raised by a different muscle, is the addition of the raising the legs with this psoas muscle, is that helping or is that hurting? Is it making it better or making it worse? It turns out it's making it worse. It's actually interfering because, and all you have to do is look at it on the anatomy chart, the psoas originates on the lumbar spine. So if you pull forward on that muscle, it causes an arching of the spine. But the abdominal muscle, the rectus abdominis, is trying to do the opposite. It's trying to flex your spine. It's trying to curve your spine. So you have one muscle that's trying to curve your spine and one muscle that's trying to arch your spine, and neither one wins. So the exercise is really just a difficult, energy costly exercise to do with much less benefit than you'd be able to get with just doing a simple crunch. But yet nobody takes the time to just look at an anatomy chart.
Yeah. So trying to
They
find
just believe what they're told. Yeah.
quick, easy way, you know, all the time.
Yeah.
And so Doug, you publish your book is called Physics of Resistant Exercise. So what could we find in it, you know, for people who are listening to the podcast about training, your training method and the way to do exercise? Could you please tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay. Well, I started 9 years ago writing this book. It took me 7 years to write it and 2 years to get it published. It's a big book. It's over 400 pages. Oh, yeah. It's endorsed by 10 PhDs from a variety of scientific backgrounds, including physics, including exercise science, paleoanthropology, biomedical engineering, neurobiology, and then also some sociology and psychology, so that we can understand why people believe what they believe and how it is difficult to change our beliefs. But it's also endorsed by 3 orthopedic surgeons and 3 champion bodybuilders, Lila Brada, Samir Bannout, and Richard Baldwin. And, you know, the bottom line is, you know, you said your method. It's really not my method. I mean, I guess we have to call it something, right? So we call it Brig 20 or the Brignole method. I guess if you called something, but yeah, you know, this is just truth. It's just logic. It's just science. As I said earlier, all muscles pull toward their origin, right? So that's one of the factors. In fact, you know, when we exercise, when we do resistance exercise, there's 3 areas that are involved in resistance exercise and all have to be considered when we are evaluating an exercise. So the first is the anatomical movement, right? So it should be logical. It should be obvious that the more precise an anatomical movement is for a given body part, the bigger percentage of work that body part will be doing. So if you move let's say your arm from the outside, from a side position, straight forward towards your sternum, you're moving toward the origin of those muscle fibers. But if you move it in an upward direction or too far downward direction, the farther you get away from the precise movement, the less percentage of contribution that muscle will play in that action. So in other words, it becomes diluted. So the first characteristic of the 3 is the precise anatomical motion for each muscle. And sometimes you would make the assumption that we already know what it is, but no, not necessarily. You'd be surprised when you just look at the origin and the insertion of the muscle and the direction of the fibers, and you say, what would be the simplest way to bring the insertion of that muscle to the origin of that muscle? That defines the precise movement. Okay, well, so now you've got one of the 3 characteristics. What is the precise movement? That's what it is. Number 2 is the physics. The physics involves a number of things having to do with levers, right? If you look at a grandfather clock pendulum, when it's hanging straight down vertically, it's in the neutral position because it's parallel with gravity. If you look at a support beam in a building, it's vertical because vertical is the neutral position. Once you move away from the vertical position, you get into varying percentages of increasing resistance. It reaches maximum when it's horizontal. When that lever, whether it's your lower leg or your upper leg, and by the way, we're talking about free weight gravity, because when we measure the physics, we have to ask ourselves, what is the direction of the resistance? And the direction could be a cable, right? It doesn't always have to be free weight gravity. It could be, you know, a machine. It could be a sled. But in this case, let's just talk about gravity. When your limb is horizontal and perpendicular to gravity, it is requiring the muscle that operates that limb to work the hardest. That's the 100% angle. Parallel with the direction of resistance is 0, and halfway between horizontal and vertical would be considered, just loosely speaking, a 50% angle. So, for example, if you're doing a barbell squat, your lower leg is the operating lever of your quadricep, but it never moves away from the vertical position more than 30 degrees. It's not even at a 45-degree angle. And to compensate for that reduction of load, you put more weight on the bar, and that compresses your spine more. So instead of compensating for the inefficient angle of the lower leg lever by putting more weight on your spine, you just do a sissy squat. Let your lower leg go more horizontal. You can actually load your quadricep more with body weight sissy squats than you can by doing a barbell squat with 200 pounds because of the angle of that lower leg lever. So physics plays a role. And then the last category is the neurological aspect. When we work out and we lift weights, there are certain neurological features that are either improving or compromising the participation of certain muscles. So for example, the simplest one to understand is this thing called bilateral deficit. Bilateral means two arms at the same time, right? And deficit means reduction, right? So if you were to take a pair of dumbbells, let's say you take a pair of, 20-pound dumbbells, and you curl them simultaneously, and you ask yourself, how difficult is this? And then you stop and you do right arm all the way up, all the way down, left arm all the way up, all the way down. You would realize it's much easier to do them separately, alternately, than it is simultaneously. That's bilateral deficit, that we can focus more energy, more strength. We can overload a muscle more when we work our limbs separately than we can work them together at the same time. So that's one of the neurological things. But one of the most significant things is this thing called reciprocal innervation. And what that means is that the body is designed in such a way that opposing muscles cannot contract with the same force. They cannot attract. In fact, they cannot contract at all simultaneously. So when you're doing a curl, let's say a one-arm dumbbell curl, your tricep is being shut off by your central nervous system through this mechanism called reciprocal innervation. In other words, your body is disallowing your tricep from being activated, because if it did, it would interfere with the action of the bicep. Well, obviously, when you're doing a curl, you don't care that your triceps are being relaxed. But when you're doing squats, barbell squats, there is a conflict of interest, and that is you're loading your glutes, and your glutes are part of the hip extensors, which includes the hamstrings and also includes the adductors to some degree. So as a result of loading the glutes, your hip flexors shut off. Well, guess what? One of the four hip flexors is your rectus femoris, which is the middle part of the quadricep. 25% of your quadricep is being deactivated when you're doing barbell squats because you're trying to simultaneously load the glutes also.
Yeah.
And because you're loading the quadriceps, the hamstring is being compromised, so it cannot participate in hip extension the way it normally would. So that function is also inhibited. So it would be much wiser to do quads and hip extensors, glutes separately, so you don't have the neurological interference. But guess what? That's called an isolation exercise, and the conventional wisdom is that that's not as good as a compound exercise. But factually, when you take it apart, you realize that that's not at all true. Anyway, that's what my book is about. It's taking all of these factors and saying, if we want the best stimulation for each of the skeletal muscles, each of which can be strengthened separately, and when they're all strengthened, they will all be equally strong when they work together, just as if you had exercised them together with a compound exercise. There's no compromise, right? So it's a very insightful book because it really goes against much of the conventional wisdom, and yet it's so logical and so provable that it's difficult to deny.
Nice. So yeah, I will put the link for your website in the description. But it seems to be a really complete book, like 400 pages, if I understand.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Now, by
cool.
the way, just so to not scare everyone off, the first 16 chapters are more science. They're more physics. They're more neurology. The last chapter 17 through 25 are body parts. So if you don't want to get involved in the science, then you can just go to the back of the book and just see the exercises that are first best, second best, third best, worst, etc. And then there's references. So when it says this is because of what we said in chapter 2, if you want to look something up, you can always look it up. But if you just want to figure out what's the best way to work out, you can just go to the back of the chapter and skip the science.
Yeah, and yeah, we can pick everything we want for each muscle and things like that, and do it part by part on a long time.
Right, exactly.
Not go it. Okay, that's nice. Just question a little bit more personal about this project, because it took you last 10 years of your life. I think it was a really big work to go with scientists and all those things. And how was your mindset about that? Did you say to yourself, okay, right now my goal is to create something I could share with younger generation and things like that, to say, okay, we have a lot of things on social media everywhere and want to give something to the world, like all the information in one book? And how did you see that? It was kind of a growing process. Say, okay, maybe I will try to write something down about muscle contraction and exercise and see where we go with that.
Okay, that's actually a very good question. So what happened was, I was, as I said, I was always very curious as a child, and I was always analyzing and experimenting and coming to certain conclusions, but I never thought about sharing this with the world. First of all, social media didn't even exist, so any thought about the world, probably didn't exist before social media, right? We always thought about our locality. I also, for the most part, didn't understand the value of what I was learning, didn't realize how valuable it would be to some people. Also somewhat assumed that some of what I was realizing was logical, was common sense, that didn't need to be explained. It was so obvious. But I didn't do anything with it. So, as I said, I started in 1975, 1976, and then I opened up my gym in 1984. I closed my gym in 1995, 11 years later. And then after a few years of just being a personal trainer and being frustrated with the industry and thinking that, it's the people that are making money in the fitness industry, big money in the fitness industry, are the ones who are lying, the ones who are selling infomercial products that don't work, the ones who are, hyping things up. And the people that are the truth tellers, the scientists, if we can survive, if we can make, enough money to live day to day, we're doing well, but it seems like we're never going to do better than that. So maybe it's time for me to change industries. So I was invited to leave in 2005 to go live in Nicaragua, Central America, to help a guy export mahogany to the United States. So I took the job, and for 2 years I spent in Nicaragua, completely away from the fitness industry, literally going into the jungles and learning how these people bring the logs out, and how they saw the logs and how we ship the logs. I learned an awful lot about that industry. After 2 years, it was just too difficult to get enough lumber. So we quit, and I came back to the United States, and I resumed my training. But the 2 years away was very good for me because it gave me sort of a fresh perspective. And so there was an article that was written about me in Ironman magazine about how Doug Brignole has come back to the sport. I was going to be competing in 2010. And Lonnie Teeper, one of the writers for Ironman magazine, mentioned that I was, thinking about writing a book about biomechanics in which I would explain why overhead presses were not a good exercise. And so somebody, how they always have letters to the editor. Someone read that and said, well, Brignole's an inspiration, but he's wrong about overhead presses. And so that, the word riled, it sort of like upset me a little bit. It sort of challenged me a little bit. And so I wrote a very, very clear, definitive essay called The Case Against Overhead Presses. And I talked about 5 very specific points, 3 of which were related to the risk of injury, 2 of which were related to the compromised value. And I gave it to the publisher of Ironman magazine, and he loved it. So he was so impressed with it. He said, "You want to start writing for us on a regular basis?" So I did. And so it was only then that I started realizing that there was an audience for this. Before that, it never even occurred to me that there was an audience for this. But and I at the time, little by little, I started thinking, well, maybe I should write a book. And but I was working full time as a trainer, and it wasn't like I could devote myself to just writing and research. So and it's difficult to write. I mean, I don't know how much writing you've done, or anyone who's listening, how much writing they've done. But if you're really writing well, you need you need peace of mind. You need space and time to just let yourself go somewhere where all of a sudden you lose track of time and place. So it's not something you can do for 15 minutes here and 20 minutes there. Either you're writing for 5 or 6 hours or you're not writing.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I wouldn't do any writing because I couldn't find a big enough period of time where I could, you know, let myself escape mentally. So that's the reason. And then, of course, you know, when you start to write, you start to channel, you start to discover things that you know that you didn't even know you knew. And then it also asks questions that then trigger you to do some research, and then you find something else. And so it's a long, tedious process. But it didn't happen all at once. And I never thought I was going to change the world. And that's never been I don't have grandiose thinking that way. I'm actually very shy and don't like the idea of being in the spotlight. But the fact is, I've slowly come to realize that the most 90% of everything we've learned through conventional, traditional ways of weightlifting are completely not ideal, completely inefficient. They just make no sense. Even a standing side raise, for example, you know, a dumbbell side raise for the shoulder, you know, muscles are always stronger when they're elongated and weaker when they're shortened. That means when your arm is hanging at your side, you're stronger, but that's when your deltoid is getting zero resistance. And as you lift your arm up, the resistance increases, but that's when your deltoid is getting weaker. You know, plus you're also loading your trapezius because whatever is opposite the direction of resistance, which is straight down gravity, your trapezius is going to be loaded even though you're not trying. All you have to do is turn on your side, lie on your side, and do a one-arm side raise in a horizontal position. And all of a sudden you've got a perfect resistance curve and you're not loading your trapezius. So there's no dispute that one is absolutely better than the other. So why do them both? Why not just do the better one?
Yeah, logical.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, great, crazy story. And I like the idea of, you know, the way that you know, about writing, that it's not kind of like a normal stuff or normal job. You say, okay, today I will take 1 hour and I will write during 1 hour because I have 1 hour between coaching. No, it's not about creativity and feeling it, you know. And yeah,
and you need to be in the mood. You need to have the mindset. You need to because as soon as you start, if you're going to get anywhere, if you're going to make any good progress on the book, you will disappear into the pages. Yeah. You will forget what time it is. If you have an appointment, you will literally skip. You will miss your appointment. I can't tell how many times I wrote until 3 or 4 in the morning because I was lost in my work.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah, it is a good feeling because all of a sudden you read what you wrote and you almost can't believe you wrote that. It's almost like something happened. Yeah. And I think that's the subconscious mind proving to us that we really do know much more than we're aware of. Our subconscious mind thinks we only know this much, but in fact, if you let it, this is probably what dreams are all about. When you let it just disappear and explore on its own, you'll discover you actually know far more than you think you know.
Yeah, crazy. It could be really kind of a form of artistic approach also, because you lost yourself, you know, and it's not. Yeah, it's the subconscious who take control. It's funny to
It's therapeutic in a way, for sure.
Yeah, and just a last question, Doug. Just to take a foot back and check about nutrition back then when you start bodybuilding. Are you more into like, I would say carbohydrate guys, or more into like, okay, low carbohydrate and high fat, high protein? What will be your approach? What was your approach back then, and did it evolve, in your bodybuilding career?
Very good question. Again, we were talking about the sociological aspects of things. Back in the 80s, sociologically speaking, everyone did chicken and rice.
Yeah.
Everyone did protein and starches. And very few people knew what a glycemic index was, right? So what happened is, I was able to compete. I was able to get lean. The American Heart Association has for years recommended this food pyramid. And the food pyramid sort of recommends a similar thing. They sort of say that the base of this pyramid has to be your carbohydrates, has to be your beans and your rice and your potatoes and your cereals and your bread at the very, very, very top, the smallest amount of your diet should be fats, and not more than that. And so most of us bodybuilders from the 80s assumed that eating a protein that was moderately high, a diet that was moderately high in protein, moderately high in carbohydrate, very low in fat, was not only the best for the bodybuilding stage, but also for health.
Yeah.
But it turns out to be false. Now, when I say that, what I mean by that is that it doesn't work for everybody. It might work for a small percentage of people. But I discovered that the vast majority of people, that diet is a recipe for a heart attack. So what happened is about, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, I had for years some degree of lower back pain. Sometimes it was worse, sometimes it was better. In retrospect, I'm sure it happened because of the heavy squatting. And during my discovery, when I was still doing some of those exercises, I never did deadlifts because I never saw the value in them. But squats, I certainly thought there was some value in it. And now in retrospect, I realize it was very foolish to compress the discs that way and to risk moving the vertebrae, and then the possibility of having the intervertebral discs basically rupture and create a herniated disc. So I had a herniated disc. I had an MRI, and it was shown to me, and there it is, and it's pushing against the nerve right there. And we can have that thing snipped off very easily, and you'll be fine. But in order to do that surgery, we need to have you do a pre-op to find out that you're okay for anesthesia. So I went to a doctor, and the doctor was a friend of mine, and so he did a regular exam. But since he's a cardiologist, he said to me, "Hey, as long as you're 57 years old, and as long as I see here on your family history that your father had heart disease, why don't we just do this test called a calcium score, and it'll tell us, if you have much or too much, or if any, arterial plaque in your arteries." Yeah. And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So we did this test, and it came back very high. I had a lot of arterial plaque in my arteries, which seemed ridiculous because I'd always eaten low fat, and I'd exercised an average of 4 or 5 days a week for the last 30 or more years. Whoa. How could this be, right? So they did 2 other tests. He said, "Let's not worry right away." So we did 2 other tests. One is called an angiogram, and the other is called nuclear treadmill test. And those tests can identify if the plaque is all in one area, narrowing one artery so much that it could be dangerous, or whether it's spread out so much that there's no one area that's narrowing too much. They did those tests, and they said, well, it's spread out, and so there's no immediate risk. And then the cardiologist says, "But keep doing what you're doing and come back and see me next year," which was such a ridiculous thing to say. What do you mean keep doing what I've been doing? That's why I'm in this mess, right? But that's because cardiologists generally don't, at least here in the United States, generally do not give nutritional advice. They don't know nutrition. So I called a friend of mine who is a biochemistry genius. And we've been friends for many, many years. And so I told him what happened. And he goes, "Well, are you doing a low-fat diet?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, that's the problem."
Whoa.
I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Look," he goes, "if you go to any biochemistry professor anywhere, they will tell you that the vast majority, 80% or more of the plaque that's in your arteries right now, you made. You didn't eat it. Right? So how do you make it? Insulin. And what makes insulin go up? Carbs. And even more when you're eating carbs in the absence of fat." He says, "Okay, so what's your cholesterol right now?" And so I say, "Well, my cholesterol had been good up until a few months ago, and it was below 200, and now it's 290. He says, "Okay, do this. For the next 6 weeks, I want you to eliminate all starches and sugars. No pasta, no bread, no cereal, no rice, no potatoes. Get all your carbohydrates only from vegetable sources."
And no fruit?
Well, a little bit of fruit, but not emphasis on fruit. Okay, so in other words, you could use the glycemic index. Anything that's below 50 or 40 is okay, even if it's a fruit category. But anything over 40, then stay away from it. And this is, for the most part, an experiment, he says. So I want you to eat as much fat as you can comfortably. At each meal, I want you to eat 1 or more of these things in significant abundance: olive oil, avocado, egg yolks, butter, ghee, coconut oil, beef, salmon, fish oil, as much as you comfortably can. He says you should be getting more calories from dietary fat than from either protein or carbohydrates. You should be getting 40% of your calories from dietary fats, 30% from protein, 30% from carbs. And the only fats you need to avoid are the ones that are polyunsaturated, meaning like safflower oil, corn oil, things like that, and the trans fats.
Of course.
That saturated fat is not bad.
Yeah, it's good energy.
In fact, we need it
to use. Yeah.
In fact, and from an evolutionary standpoint, there's no way we couldn't have evolved to eat animal fat. It's just in our evolution. So he says, and do that for 6 weeks. Have your cholesterol checked again and let me know what it is. I did all that, had it checked again. My cholesterol had gone down to 138.
The LDL cholesterol?
I don't remember that now, but you're right.
Yeah.
But the point was that here I was eating low fat. And when I was eating low fat, I had a 290 cholesterol. When I was eating high fat, I got 138 cholesterol. And then, of course, since then, we've had many, many more blood tests. And I always look at LDL, VLDL, HDL.
Yeah.
You know, all the other numbers, the glucose, the insulin, all the other, because there was another thing that was happening at the same time. And that was that I was, just before I had this test done, I noticed that I was waking up in the middle of the night 2, 3, 4 times sometimes, drenched in sweat. And I didn't know why. I would just change my t-shirt and go back to bed. And then I would have a blood test and I would discover that in the morning, my insulin was high, my glucose was low. Well, all of that factors in. It turns out that somewhere along the way, my metabolism changed. And somewhere along the way, I became overreactive, insulin response to carbohydrates. So here I was eating, fish or steak and a potato or rice and going to bed. But that high glycemic carbohydrate, in the absence of too much fat or enough fat, would spike my insulin. Throughout the night, I would have low blood sugar. I wake up in the morning with low blood sugar. My insulin is still spiked. And in the meantime, that insulin spike is literally manufacturing cholesterol. So it's, there's a lot of other organizations here in the United States that do preach now, not necessarily low carbohydrate, but the avoidance of high glycemic carbohydrates, and encouraging the eating of fats, encouraging eating of healthy fats and healthy oils, because they are part of what is required for a good nutrition. And this last time I competed, I realized that it works for bodybuilding too, because once you get rid of the insulin spiking factor, which kind of messes up everything. In other words, if you have insulin spikes, you might have a difficult time losing body fat, even if you're not eating a lot of calories. Yeah. Because it interferes with the fat loss process. Whereas once you get rid of the insulin issue and all you're dealing with is just calories in, calories out, then you can easily, gradually cut your percentages of all of them and lower your caloric intake to the point where your body relies on its body fat stores. And so you can get just as lean, but without suffering so much, because that diet I was using before really did cause a lot of suffering, and rightfully so, because you're dealing with your body resisting fat loss because of the insulin spikes, but you're starving.
Yeah, well,
there's no reason to starve.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, you would say moderate carbohydrates, but no ketosis.
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom line is if you eat your carbohydrate sources only from vegetable sources with mostly with maybe, let's say, 20% of your carbohydrates coming from fruits, you won't be able to eat too many carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Because it's not as condensed.
Yeah.
Not only that, but when you eat a diet that has a significant amount of dietary fat in the meal, that meal stays with you longer. You're not hungry an hour or two after the meal. So you are able to eat less frequently. And that's another way that you can control your calories.
Yeah. Yeah, because we have maybe more fibers also with vegetables.
Exactly. Yeah, significantly more. And significantly more phytonutrients, more vitamins and minerals, more enzymes.
Yeah. Yeah, funny. So yeah, you really evolved on your nutrition since the last year. So
there's a really good book written by, I think his name is Nathaniel something. Anyway, it's called the It's called The Story of the Human Body.
Nice.
And in that book, he explains the evolution of humans, but he talks about the period of time where humanity entered into agriculture. And before that, it was all hunter-gatherer. We were eating animals and proteins, and we were eating plants and vegetation. And then all of a sudden we started farming. And the farming led to rice and potatoes and grains and bread. And so that created a lot of problems. First of all, a lot fewer phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals. It was a diet that was mostly high in carbohydrate but low in nutrients. And at the same time that was happening, and of course spiking people's insulin and all that, and depriving them of other nutrients. At the same time, people were moving and started living in the areas where the crops were. So that factor, that bringing all those people together, increased disease. When you were living farther apart and you were eating, from your hunter and gathering, you were farther apart. There was less contamination, less, So it's an interesting book. I encourage your readers to look at it, because it really tells not only about what happened in our early evolution in terms of how we developed the needs we have, but also how those needs now conflict with what we're doing with seats and air conditioning and television monitors and computer screens, and how even nearsightedness now is factors into the equation, whereas before, when we didn't spend so much time looking close, we had less vision problems apparently.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So we need to check this book. I will add it in the description also. I will ask you the exact name in message.
Yeah, I think, yeah, okay.
No problem. So perfect. So thank you so much for all this answer. It was really, really interesting about nutrition and even on training and stuff like that. And I will be happy to have more information, and I will check this book. I will take it. And Doug, just to finish, would you have something to say, for a young guy, want to go into bodybuilding and evolve by his own? And if you have a kind of advice you would give him, what would it be?
Well, I'm not trying to sell my book, but if I had a son that was 10 years old, I would not have him doing barbell squats. I would not have him doing parallel bar dips, deadlifts. There's a lot of exercises that we did do when we were younger, that you then develop, a bad shoulder or a bad back that will stay with you forever. And we look at, what's his name? Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah.
Ronnie Coleman is now basically a cripple.
Yeah.
He can't walk without a walker. He's got constant 24 hours a day pain. And if you ask him, he will say it was worth it.
Yeah.
And the reason he says it was worth it is because, yes, he did achieve magnificent results in bodybuilding, but he still doesn't know that there's a better way to do what he did. He can get just as much muscle loading with exercises that don't require as much weight to be used. So, Rick Drayson, who I'm on the show with all the time.
Yeah.
he also can now not walk. He's in an assisted living facility. His hands are numb. He can't raise his arms even enough to drink a glass of water. He can't stand on his own. These are injuries that could all be prevented if we learn a better way to do resistance exercise that doesn't strain the skeleton and joints so much. So if there were more than one place that I knew of where you can get that information, I would freely tell it to you right now. The only place I know it exists in one place is my book. And everything that you find in my book, you can Google and you can find corroboration for it in a lot of other places, but not all in one place. So, it's important for us to ask ourselves at all time, what was the shoulder joint designed to do? Am I exercising the muscles of the upper body using the shoulder joint the way it was designed to be used, or am I violating the way it was meant to be used? That's number one. And number two is, am I using the most efficient physics? The thing I should be caring the most about is whether that muscle is maximally challenged, even if the weight I'm using to do it isn't an impressive weight to watch. Right? You should only care about maximum effort. You shouldn't care about maximum weight.
Yeah.
Right. And so and of course, you can't, it's foolish to dream of being a superhero. So let us not try to be a power lifter and a boxer and a kickboxer and a bodybuilder and a swimmer and everything. I mean, we watch these movies and these, characters can do everything. We need to focus. We need to select our priorities, and we need to divide our time equally so that we're not obsessed too much with one thing, that we're spreading ourselves out, we're educating ourselves, we're spending time with our family, we're spending some mental energy on our career aspirations. Yes, I'm focusing on my body, but let it not be only for cosmetics. Let it also be for health and aesthetics and things like that. Just be well-rounded in your approach to the world.
Yeah. So yes, for summer, don't follow the trend. Keep open-minded and watch.
Or at least question the trends. Ask if they're. I mean, look, why do people walk with their shoes untied? Why do people walk with their half their butt showing? Because that's not a more comfortable way. Look, I really encourage people to be sensible in their decisions. People who get a tattoo, are you getting a tattoo because you think that you'll be cooler having a tattoo? Why would being cool matter to you? There's more important things to worry about. Yeah. Right? Do things sensibly. Wear your clothes sensibly. Make your choices sensibly. Use your intelligence. Don't deny your intelligence, and don't fall into the trap of just following the masses without even thinking about what you're doing, and then ruining your body, ruining your health, and then ruining your credibility.
Well, nice. Thank you.
My pleasure. By the way, do you know about the town of Brignole, right?
About what? Sorry?
The town of Brignole in the south of France.
Yeah, of course. We are talking about that.
That's my ancestry. Yeah, in the 13th century, apparently, my ancestors went from the town of Brignole to the northern part of Italy, before Italy was even a country, to the northern part, Genoa. And there they laid early roots in the Grimaldi family and the Brignole family. They dropped the S, by the way. And then when I think it's in the 15th century, when Italy was becoming a country, the Grimaldis went to Monaco, and the Brignoles went to Chile, Peru, and Argentina.
Yeah, nice story. So maybe next time, as we are talking, the podcast would be in French.
I'm hoping to learn the language. At least I can pronounce Brignole correctly, right?
Yeah, it's perfect. Brignole, we say it exactly like that. So it's a good point for start.
That's right. Okay.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you, Jordan. My pleasure. It's wonderful talking with you.
Yeah, me too. And hope maybe have another project together.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye, Doug.
Bye-bye now.